In the deep, whispering silence of a primordial forest, where ancient trees stretched their gnarled limbs toward a bruised sky, there existed a realm untouched by the fleeting tick of modern time, a realm ruled by the eternal dance of nature and the enigmatic forces of the night. This was the land of the werewolf packs, a mosaic of tribes each cloaked in their own lore and legacy. The wind, carrying the faint echoes of forgotten lullabies and the mournful cry of distant ancestors, rustled through the silvered leaves, in that twilight between dusk and dawn, where shadows merged with the remnants of fading light. One could almost hear the murmurs of destiny calling out, a promise that life was forever in flux, and that within the heart of every creature lay a spark of the divine wild. Amid this rugged and unforgiving landscape, where the moon's pale glow revealed the delicate interplay of nature's beauty and brutality, a small figure moved silently along a narrow, winding path. This was Mabel, a child whose tender frame belied the strength and resilience that pulsed quietly within her soul. Even in those early moments of life, when every rustle of the wind and every creak of the forest floor echoed with mystery and portent, Mabel sensed that she was destined for something extraordinary, a fate woven with threads of sorrow, hope, and incandescent passion. Mabel's eyes, a soft mixture of vulnerability and quiet determination, took in the majesty of the wilderness. Around her, the forest, alive with the perfume of moss and the damp, earthy scent of decay, was her playground and her sanctuary. Each towering tree seemed to hold secrets of ancient pack lore, and every breeze that swept past carried whispers of a time when the world was young and every being was bound by a primal unspoken covenant. Here, in the solitude of the wild, the natural order was a delicate balance of survival and sublime beauty, and it was here that Mabel's journey began. At her side, a sturdy, comforting presence guided her every step. Boras, her tender caretaker, whose gentle hands and knowing eyes offered the solace of unconditional love. Boras was more than a guardian. He was a living repository of the old ways, a storyteller who wove the timeless teachings of their people into the fabric of everyday life. His weathered face, marked by years of both hardship and quiet joy, radiated wisdom. In his soft-spoken manner, Boras would often remind Mabel that in this world of fierce allegiances and bitter rivalries among the werewolf packs, the true measure of a soul lay not in strength alone, but in the depth of one's capacity to feel both the pain of loss and the warmth of belonging. As they traversed the forest's hidden trails, the natural world around them was at once a spectacle and a testament to nature's endless capacity for renewal. The distant sound of a babbling brook, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, and the haunting call of a lone wolf punctuated the silence. These sounds, intermingled with the subtle cadence of Boras's reassuring voice, created a symphony that resonated deep within Mabel's heart. In those moments, the forest was not merely a backdrop, it was a character in its own right, a living, breathing entity that shaped the destiny of all who dwelled within its borders. Mabel's early years were defined by a mixture of fragility and formidable resilience. Though small in stature and delicate in appearance, she possessed an inner fortitude that belied her youth. Every gentle word from Boras, every lesson whispered amidst the rustling leaves, fortified her spirit. She learned, even as a child, that the world of the werewolf packs was divided by more than just territory. It was split by ancient prejudices, rigid hierarchies, and long-standing grudges that stretched back to the dawn of their kind. In this world, the boundaries between packs were drawn not only in blood, but in the stark contrasts of belief and tradition. The societal fabric of these packs was woven with threads of pride and pain. From a tender age, Mabel was acutely aware of the divisions that segregated her world. Some packs prided themselves on their fierce independence and unyielding honor, while others were marred by internal strife and the bitterness of past betrayals. It was in these early days, watching the elders gather beneath the boughs of ancient oaks, and hearing the low, sonorous growls of authority that resonated through the twilight, that Mabel's sensitive heart began to understand the complexities of her heritage. Each whispered conversation among the pack's leaders, every subtle glance exchanged during moments of quiet assembly, planted within her a seed of curiosity about her own place in this intricate tapestry. Boris, with his tender wisdom, would often speak of destiny and the way that every creature, regardless of size or strength, carried within it the potential for great change. "Remember, little one," he would say softly, cradling her hand, as they walked along the mossy paths. "Even the smallest ember can ignite a raging fire. Your journey is not defined by the limits of your body, but by the vastness of your spirit." Those words, spoken with the gravity of experience and the warmth of a father's love, echoed within Mabel's soul, kindling a fragile but persistent hope that one day she would rise above the constraints imposed upon her by fate and circumstance. Yet, despite the comfort Boris provided, there was an underlying sense of isolation that clung to Mabel like a second skin. In a world where the destiny of every werewolf was often predetermined by birth, where every trait and tendency was scrutinized under the relentless gaze of tradition, Mabel felt as if she were an anomaly, a delicate flower growing in the shadow of towering, unyielding pines. There was a poignant loneliness in that realization, a bittersweet awareness that from the moment of her birth, she had been set apart, marked by a fate that promised both greatness and heartache. As the days passed, the forest became both a refuge and a mirror, reflecting the myriad contradictions of her existence. The gentle lapping of water against ancient stones, the flicker of light through the dense canopy, and the soft hum of life all combined to create an atmosphere thick with mystery and longing. Mabel's inner world, rich with dreams and dreads, was as much a part of the forest as the winding streams and whispering trees. In quiet moments, when the world seemed to hold its breath, she could feel the pulse of destiny thrumming softly in her veins, a subtle reminder that her life, seemingly so fragile, was destined to unfold in ways that transcended the ordinary. In those moments of introspection, as she gazed up at the endless expanse of starlit sky, Mabel sensed that her destiny was entwined with the very fabric of the wilderness. The forest, with all its ancient secrets and wild, unrestrained beauty, was a living allegory for the complexities of her own soul. There was a promise in the air, a promise that her journey, though laden with sorrow and struggle, would eventually blossom into something far more profound and transformative. Every rustle in the dark, every murmur of the wind, seemed to be a prelude to the changes that awaited her, changes that would shatter the confines of her current existence and reveal the hidden depths of her true self. Within the broader tapestry of the werewolf packs, the forces of destiny were at work in subtle yet inexorable ways. The divisions that marked the society of the packs, ancient rivalries, prejudices, and strict codes of honor, were but the outward manifestations of deeper, more mystical currents that swirled beneath the surface. For Mabel, growing up amidst these turbulent undercurrents meant that every day was a lesson in both beauty and pain, every encounter a step toward a destiny she could only glimpse in fleeting moments of clarity. It was as if the very air she breathed was infused with the scent of destiny, a heady, intoxicating blend of wild freedom and the crushing weight of expectation. Boris's teachings and the quiet strength of the forest imbued Mabel with an understanding that her life was not meant to be ordinary. Even as she struggled with the loneliness that came from being different in a society obsessed with conformity, she harbored a secret belief that her path was destined to diverge from the rigid expectations of her peers. The whispers of the forest and the tender murmur of Boris's voice became a constant refrain, urging her to embrace her unique nature, to trust that her sensitivity was not a weakness, but a beacon, guiding her toward a future where she could transcend the limitations imposed upon her. In that ancient, wild place where time seemed to stand still, Mabel's journey had only just begun. The wind, carrying the timeless echoes of the past, seemed to murmur softly of change, a change that would see her transform from a delicate, uncertain child into a force capable of reshaping the very fabric of the pack's world. The seeds of destiny had been sown deep within her heart, and as she took each tentative step along the mossy path, she could feel the stirrings of a future filled with both unimaginable challenges and the promise of a rebirth as magnificent as the dawn. Thus, in the interplay of light and shadow beneath the ancient boughs, the stage was set for a story that would not only redefine the boundaries of the werewolf packs, but also illuminate the inner strength of one extraordinary soul. Mabel's destiny, wrapped in the fragile shroud of youth yet burning with the intensity of 1,000 hidden suns, awaited its unfolding. A narrative that would blend the stark realism of hardship with the transcendent beauty of dreams, a tale destined to echo through the ages as a testament to the indomitable spirit of the wild. And so, in this enchanted wilderness where every whispered breeze held the weight of destiny, Mabel's heart beat softly, a tender rhythm of hope and longing, a promise that even in the solitude of the deepest night, the seeds of tomorrow were already taking root, ready to burst forth in an eruption of light and life that would change everything. The clamor of high school life was a far cry from the quiet, nurturing embrace of the forest. Mabel's daily journey through the rigid corridors of her pack's school was a descent into an icy realm of pressure and isolation. A stark, unforgiving world where every whisper and sidelong glance cut deeper than any fang. The long, echoing halls, lined with lockers that seemed to slam shut with a finality that echoed the rejection of her very soul, bore silent witness to the countless moments of heartbreak and self-doubt that plagued her young existence. Inside, a classroom that buzzed with a tepid mixture of chatter and indifferent silence. Rows of desks stood in neat, suffocating order. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting cold, pale shadows that danced over the anxious faces of students. It was in this environment of structured monotony that Mabel sat, a solitary figure in a sea of conformity. Her desk, positioned at the very edge of the room, offered little solace. Here, her presence was a muted whisper amid the louder declarations of belonging from her peers. Every creak of the wooden floor, every rustle of paper, seemed to amplify the cavernous gap between her inner world and the cold reality of the pack's rigid social structure. As the teacher droned on about lessons that held little relevance to her inner truth, Mabel's thoughts wandered to the distant echoes of the forest, a realm of beauty and unrestrained freedom, so starkly contrasting the oppressive order of the classroom. Her heart ached with a deep, unspoken sorrow, an emotion that seemed to rise up unbidden with every dismissive glance and every whispered remark from those who saw her as an anomaly. The harsh, disapproving stares of her classmates burned like cold fire into her sensitive soul. They were the silent affirmations of her status as an outsider, a delicate, misunderstood being who did not fit neatly into the prescribed molds of her pack's society. Between the rigid lines of school protocol and the relentless ticking of the clock, Mabel's inner monologue was a tumultuous blend of fear, despair, and a fragile hope. In the moments when she dared to close her eyes, she envisioned herself as a small ember, vulnerable yet burning with a quiet determination to prove that even the faintest light could, in time, grow into an inferno. Yet for every surge of hope, a shadow of doubt would creep in. Was she doomed to be forever isolated? Forever a lone spirit drifting in a sea of unyielding expectations? Every dismissal, every hurtful comment, magnified the sense of alienation that clung to her like a shroud. The hallway outside the classroom was no sanctuary either. Crowded with the hustle and bustle of students, it was a corridor of clashing personalities and fierce hierarchies. The air was thick with tension, a palpable hostility that was as much a part of the daily routine as the ringing of the bell. As Mabel moved through the throng, her slender frame seemed to shrink further, eclipsed by the overwhelming presence of her more assertive packmates. Their eyes, filled with condescension and barely concealed disdain, seemed to say without words that she did not belong. In that moment, the corridor became a living metaphor for the inner conflict that raged within her. A constant struggle to carve out a space for herself, in a world that valued conformity above all else. In the cacophony of footsteps and murmurs, Mabel's thoughts swirled like autumn leaves caught in a frenzied wind. She remembered the gentle, reassuring voice of Boras, echoing in her mind. Even the smallest ember can ignite a raging fire. Yet, despite his words, each day felt like a relentless test of her endurance, a trial where the weight of her isolation pressed down upon her like an unyielding boulder. The sharp sting of loneliness was an ever-present companion, a reminder of the price she paid for being different. It was a loneliness not born solely of being physically alone, but of a deeper, more haunting disconnection. Being estranged from the very essence of her pack's identity. Amid the cold indifference of the school corridors, fleeting moments of warmth occasionally broke through the gloom. There were glimmers of hope in the form of quiet smiles from those few who, like her, carried the burden of being outsiders. In the middle of an otherwise indifferent crowd, Mabel once caught a soft, tentative smile from a classmate whose eyes seemed to speak of shared sorrows. Though brief, that silent acknowledgement resonated deeply within her, sparking a tiny ember of possibility. Perhaps there were others, too, who felt the same chasm between who they were and what society demanded them to be. These fleeting moments, however rare, left Mabel with a lingering question. Could a genuine connection, one that transcended the rigid boundaries of the pack, one day change the course of her life? In quiet corners of the school library, where the hum of distant conversations mingled with the rustle of turning pages, Mabel would retreat into her own world. Surrounded by stories of heroes and legends, she often found solace in the fabled. Tales of werewolves who had defied destiny, who had transcended the confines of their predetermined roles. Here, in the silence punctuated by the turning of pages, her imagination soared, painting vivid pictures of a future where she might not only belong but also rise to command the respect and recognition that had so long eluded her. Yet even as she dreamed of a different life, the harsh reality of her daily existence loomed large. The weight of judgment and the cold gaze of tradition were constant reminders that dreams, however radiant, were often at odds with the unyielding nature of her world. The academic pressures were relentless, a ceaseless barrage of expectations that left little room for the tender exploration of her true self. Assignments, tests, and projects piled up like insurmountable obstacles, each one a reminder of the rigid structure that governed her life. The very act of learning, which should have been a gateway to self-discovery, became another arena where she was forced to measure herself against standards that were as unforgiving as they were arbitrary. The sterile environment of the classroom, with its cold walls and impersonal desks, only deepened the sense of isolation. Every time Mabel felt her heart quicken with a spark of hope, the chill of reality snuffed it out, leaving her with a lingering sense of inadequacy and despair. In these moments of quiet desperation, Mabel would sometimes overhear the hushed conversations of older students discussing the intricate politics of their pack. Their voices, low and conspiratorial, spoke of alliances forged in the crucible of power and of betrayals that had left scars deeper than any physical wound. These discussions, filled with a blend of admiration and trepidation, painted a picture of a society where loyalty was both a cherished ideal and a weapon to be wielded. For Mabel, each whispered word was a reminder of the countless battles fought not only on the physical plane, but also within the confines of the heart and mind. It was in these moments of overheard truth that she realized her own internal struggle was but a microcosm of the larger, more brutal conflicts that defined life within the pack. Yet, despite the overwhelming pressures and the seemingly insurmountable barriers, there remained a quiet, stubborn hope within Mabel. A hope that whispered of a future where her inherent worth would be recognized, where the fire of her spirit would illuminate the darkness of isolation. Every day in the oppressive corridors of her school was a battle to maintain the fragile belief that she was not and never would be invisible. In the midst of the relentless judgment and the cold indifference of her peers, Mabel's heart clung to the possibility of transformation. a future where she would encounter those who could break through the walls of isolation and awaken the dormant strength within her. As the school day progressed, the tension in the hallways seemed to build to an almost unbearable crescendo. The clatter of feet, the murmur of dismissive voices, and the relentless ticking of the clock all conspired to remind Mabel of the fleeting nature of time and the weight of expectations. Every moment was a reminder that, somewhere deep inside, she was fighting a silent war against the forces that sought to define her solely by her perceived shortcomings. Yet, in the midst of that struggle, the seed of possibility had been sown. There were whispers in the wind, a suggestion that destiny might soon usher in a change, a meeting that could shatter the boundaries of isolation and set her on a path toward a life filled with meaning, connection, and perhaps even love. In these moments of introspection, as she navigated the labyrinthine corridors of her school, Mabel's thoughts were punctuated by the realization that her journey was far from over. The challenges of the present were merely the prologue to a much grander narrative, a narrative where the pain of today would give way to the triumphs of tomorrow. Every scornful glance, every whispered insult, only served to forge her resolve. The battles fought in the solitude of her heart were preparing her for the eventual, inevitable confrontation with the destiny that awaited her beyond the cold walls of the classroom. As the final bell rang, releasing a tide of students into the chaotic freedom of the afternoon, Mabel lingered at the threshold of the hallway, her gaze fixed on the horizon. In that brief, suspended moment, she allowed herself to wonder, would she someday find a kindred spirit, someone whose own heart beat with the same fierce, unyielding passion for life? Someone who could see past the cold veneer of tradition and recognize the incandescent light within her? The thought, as delicate as it was daring, ignited a spark of hope deep within her. A silent promise that even in the darkest moments of loneliness, the future might hold the possibility of connection and redemption. In the solitude of that transient pause, as the echo of departing footsteps faded into the distance, Mabel resolved to carry the lessons of her pain as both a burden and a blessing. For in the crucible of isolation, she had discovered the raw materials of her own strength, the resilience to rise above the frigid confines of a society that had long deemed her an outcast. And though the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, the silent vow that she made to herself was as clear as the whispering winds through the ancient trees. One day, she would break free from the chains of isolation, and in doing so, reshape the destiny of not only her own life, but the very fabric of her pack's existence. Thus, as the twilight descended and the soft glow of the setting sun bathed the world in hues of hope and sorrow, Mabel stepped forward into the uncertain future, a future where every scar, every whispered insult, would serve as a reminder of the unyielding spirit that burned within her. The pain of school days, with all its harshness and cruelty, had become the forge in which her destiny was being shaped, a destiny that promised transformation, redemption, and a future defined not by isolation, but by the possibility of connection, love, and an unbreakable sense of self. In the heart of a sprawling urban landscape that lay at the edge of the ancient wilderness, where modernity met myth, the world of the werewolf packs revealed its multifaceted nature. Neon lights flickered against the backdrop of towering buildings, while the lingering shadows of old forests whispered of traditions long past. It was here, in this liminal space between the old and the new, that destinies began to intertwine, destinies that would forever alter the course of those who dwelled in the twilight of power and passion. Mabel's steps were hesitant, yet determined, as she navigated the busy intersection of territories. Every sight and sound carried the echoes of rivalries, of unspoken laws that governed the existence of the packs. The Riverside Pack, known for their disciplined order and cold, calculating efficiency, maintained an imposing presence in the city's underbelly. Their members moved with a measured precision that spoke of centuries-old traditions and a ruthless dedication to their own code. It was in this atmosphere of silent confrontation that Mabel first encountered Beta Brennan. Brennan emerged from the throng of pack members like a figure out of a myth, a striking presence whose eyes gleamed with both intelligence and a hint of rebellious fire. Tall and lean, with an aura that effortlessly blended charm with a touch of defiance, he moved through the crowd with a confident grace. When his gaze met Mabel's, it was as if time momentarily slowed. In that fleeting instant, the clamor of the city faded into a muted hum, leaving behind a powerful silence filled with unspoken questions and tentative possibilities. "Hey," Brennan's voice broke through the silence, a tone that was both inviting and laced with an underlying edge. His greeting was simple, yet it carried the weight of a promise, hinting at stories untold and battles yet to be fought. For a moment, Mabel felt both drawn to and wary of him. There was a palpable tension in the air, a collision of emotions, the curiosity of a soul yearning to connect, intertwined with the instinctive fear born of a life spent on the margins of belonging. Their first exchange took place on a rain-slicked street, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement like shards of broken glass. Brennan's eyes, cool and penetrating, studied Mabel as if he could see straight into the depths of her guarded heart. In that charged encounter, the differences between the packs were starkly illuminated. Brennan's measured, almost regal demeanor stood in stark contrast to the wild, unpredictable energy that Mabel carried within her, a blend of vulnerability and the raw intensity of suppressed dreams. As they began to walk together, side by side through the bustling thoroughfare, Brennan explained in low, deliberate tones the rigid structures that define the Riverside Pack. "We live by rules, Mabel," he murmured, his voice a blend of authority and wistfulness. "Rules that have kept us alive for generations. But sometimes those same rules can bind us in chains we can't break." His words resonated deeply within her, echoing the familiar inner conflict she had always harbored. The desire to break free from societal expectations, and the fear of the consequences that might follow. Between the rapid shifts of neon and shadow, the city itself seemed to transform into a living film, a montage of intense, vibrant scenes interspersed with moments of reflective solitude. Every corner turned revealed another layer of the werewolf world. Glimpses of pack members in heated discussions, quick exchanges of wary glances between rival groups, and the unmistakable undercurrent of tension that wove its way through every interaction. In this cinematic landscape, the convergence of different packs was not just inevitable, it was the very essence of existence. The contrast between the Riverside Pack and Mabel's own background was immediately evident. Where the Riverside Pack prized discipline, order, and a cold, almost clinical detachment, her own pack, steeped in ancient tradition and raw emotion, embraced a more tumultuous, passionate approach to life. These differences were not merely superficial. They spoke to the very core of what each group believed about power, loyalty, and survival. For Mabel, the interplay of these contrasting philosophies stirred an inner storm of mixed emotions, a cocktail of fear, curiosity, and an ember of hope that perhaps, someday, the old wounds could be healed. As Brennan led her deeper into the territory where Riverside's influence reigned, Mabel could not help but notice the subtle, yet profound differences in the environment. The streets here were quieter, the air cooler, and the eyes of passers-by sharper, each glance laden with an unspoken warning. Yet, amid this tension, there were also moments of inexplicable beauty. A street musician's soulful melody echoing through an alleyway, a mural depicting mythical scenes of werewolf legends bathed in the soft glow of twilight. These glimpses of unexpected grace served as a counterpoint to the underlying rigidity, hinting at the possibility of change and renewal even within the strictest of orders. Within this charged atmosphere, Mabel's mind was a battleground of emotions. Every step alongside Brennan brought with it both a surge of hope and the haunting specter of self-doubt. Was it possible that within this world of established hierarchies and ancient grudges, she could ever find a place where her true self could be acknowledged and celebrated? Brennan's presence, so enigmatic and full of contradictions, offered a tantalizing glimpse into a future that might defy the boundaries set by tradition. A future where individual strength and the courage to challenge the status quo could spark a revolution of the heart. Their conversation meandered through memories of past conflicts, of lost battles and the scars left behind on both body and soul. Brennan recounted tales of pack rivalries and whispered intrigues with a voice that was both lyrical and laced with pain, a reminder of the heavy cost that came with defying ancient customs. His words painted vivid images of harsh winter nights, when the full moon cast eerie shadows across the snow, of battles fought beneath a sky ablaze with the promise of dawn. Yet, interspersed with these dark recollections were moments of tender defiance, a shared smile, a fleeting touch, that hinted at the possibility of a future unbound by the chains of old animosities. In one such moment, as the rain began to subside and the clouds parted to reveal a sliver of starlight, Brennan paused before a graffiti-covered wall that served as a canvas for the unspoken dreams of countless rebels. "Sometimes," he said softly, almost to himself, "the scars we bear are the marks of battles that we must win to find our true selves." His gaze, intense and searching, fell upon Mabel, as if he were silently asking her whether she too carried such scars, a history of pain that, if embraced, could become the foundation of strength. For Mabel, that question reverberated deep within her. It was both an accusation and an invitation, a challenge to confront the loneliness that had long shadowed her every step. The encounter with Brennan set in motion a chain of events that would ripple through the very fabric of the werewolf packs. Their meeting was fated, a collision of two disparate worlds that, despite their differences, were bound together by the same unyielding desire for freedom and recognition. In that brief, electric moment, the cold pragmatism of the riverside pack and the passionate, untamed spirit of Mabel's own lineage began to merge, creating a tension that was as irresistible as it was dangerous. As they parted ways that evening, the cityscape transforming once more into a dazzling mosaic of light and dark, Mabel felt the echo of Brennan's presence linger like a whispered promise. It was a promise that in the labyrinth of alliances and rivalries, there existed the potential for transformation, a chance for her to rise above the pain of isolation and to embrace a destiny that was her own. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, its twists and turns as unpredictable as the flickering shadows of the urban night. Yet, within that uncertainty lay the allure of possibility, the hope that one day she might find someone who understood the turbulent cadence of her heart, someone who could stand beside her as both a challenger and a cherished ally. In the days that followed, as Mabel navigated the intricate dynamics of pack politics, the vivid imagery of her first encounter with Brennan remained etched in her memory. The vivid clash of cultures, the stark, almost clinical detachment of the Riverside pack, juxtaposed with the raw, unfiltered passion of her own kind, served as a constant reminder of the internal and external conflicts that defined her world. Every interaction, every subtle gesture exchanged in the dim light of a rain-soaked alley, was a testament to the unspoken struggle for identity and belonging. There was a charged electricity in the air whenever members of different packs crossed paths, a palpable tension that hinted at both conflict and the possibility of unexpected alliances. The Riverside pack, with their calculated discipline, often regarded outsiders with a mix of suspicion and veiled envy, while those from Mabel's own pack were known for their fierce loyalty and, at times, impassioned rebellion. This dynamic created a complex tapestry of relationships, where every word spoken and every glance exchanged carried the potential to alter the balance of power. Within this intricate dance of dominance and defiance, Mabel's heart was a maelstrom of emotions: fear, curiosity, and a yearning for connection that defied the cold logic of pack hierarchies. The memory of Brennan's soft yet defiant tone, his eyes shimmering with both regret and determination, fueled her determination to seek a future where the old divisions might one day crumble. It was a future where the scars of the past could be transformed into the seeds of a new beginning, a future where her own worth was not measured by the rigid standards of an age-old order, but by the fierce, unyielding fire of her spirit. The city's pulse quickened with the approach of midnight. The neon glow gave way to the subtle luminescence of street lamps, and the night took on a surreal, dreamlike quality. In that fleeting moment, as Mabel stood on the threshold between two worlds, she realized that her destiny was inexorably linked to the forces at play around her. Every step she took, every whispered word exchanged in the shadows, was a note in the grand, unfolding symphony of her life. A symphony that promised both heartache and hope in equal measure. Thus, as the echoes of that fateful encounter with Brennan resonated in the cool night air, Mabel stepped forward with a quiet resolve. The convergence of packs was not merely a clash of cultures. It was a crucible where the raw materials of destiny were forged. In that crucible, the boundaries of the old world would be tested, and in their place, a new order, defined by compassion, strength, and the courage to defy convention, might one day emerge. And so, amid the shifting light and shadow of a city, caught between myth and modernity, Mabel's journey continued. Each passing moment, laden with the weight of tradition and the promise of revolution, pulled her deeper into a fate that was as uncertain as it was inevitable. The mingling of fear, desire, and an unquenchable thirst for acceptance coursed through her veins like wildfire, igniting within her the determination to embrace her destiny, even if it meant challenging the very foundations upon which the world of the werewolf packs had been built. In the silent, charged aftermath of that initial encounter, the stage was set for a narrative that would span across territories, shatter long-held prejudices, and ultimately redefine the nature of power and identity. Mabel, with her heart aflame with both trepidation and hope, was poised at the crossroads of a transformation that would not only alter her own fate, but also the destiny of every soul, caught in the intricate web of loyalty, rebellion, and love. As the night deepened and the city whispered its secrets to the stars, Mabel's resolve solidified. The fateful meeting with Brennan had planted a seed of rebellion, of hope, and of the promise that true connection could transcend even the most impenetrable barriers. And in that quiet certainty, amid the clash of rivalries and the soft glow of possibility, her journey toward a future of endless potential began in earnest. In the stillness of a stormy afternoon, the world around Mabel darkened, not only in the skies above, but within the very chambers of her heart. The once familiar corridors of her school, which had always echoed with the cold monotony of routine, transformed into a stage for unspeakable violence and heartbreak. It began as an ordinary day, the heavy air laden with the scent of rain, when an unexpected series of events shattered the fragile calm that had long defined her existence. In a moment that seemed suspended in time, a group of hostile figures emerged from the shadows, their faces twisted with malice and cloaked in an air of authority that belonged to those who wielded power without compassion, closed in on Mabel. The sound of hurried footsteps, echoing like the drumming of war, mingled with the distant rumble of thunder. In that harrowing instant, Mabel's world tilted violently. A kidnapping, an act of brutality so stark and unprovoked that it left her reeling both physically and emotionally. The scene unfolded with a cinematic intensity. Mabel, barely able to comprehend the horror around her, was yanked from the familiar safety of her classroom. Rough hands gripped her slender arms, and she was forcibly dragged into a dim, forgotten corridor, the walls stained with the residue of past sorrows. The ambient light flickered as if trying to escape the unfolding nightmare, casting erratic shadows that danced wildly across the cold, hard floor. Every sound, the crack of a fist, the desperate stifling of a cry, melded into a cacophony of terror that seared itself into her memory. Amid this maelstrom of violence, her body trembled with a pain that was both physical and deeply spiritual. Each brutal blow was a brutal reminder of her vulnerability. Yet, paradoxically, it also illuminated a hidden strength deep within her. As her vision blurred with tears, and the metallic tang of blood filled her mouth, memories of softer times, of Boris's gentle words and the warm embrace of nature, surfaced like distant echoes. In those fleeting recollections lay a bittersweet mixture, the comfort of once safe memories colliding with the present agony of betrayal and hurt. Just as the violence threatened to consume her entirely, a familiar presence emerged from the darkness. Brennan. Like a guardian angel clad in the resolve of a warrior, he intervened with a force that spoke of deep, unyielding compassion. Brennan's arrival was both sudden and resolute. His voice, low and resonant, cut through the chaos as he commanded the assailants to step back. In that split second, the air shifted, and an intense silence fell over the corridor. A silence that was both heavy with dread and pregnant with the possibility of mercy. "Leave her alone." Brennan's shout was a lifeline thrown into the storm of violence, and his eyes burned with a fierce determination that softened the very edges of the brutality surrounding them. His intervention was a raw display of humanity amid the cruelty, a moment where the cruelty of the act was met with the warmth of unwavering protection. The aggressors, caught off guard by his sudden defiance, hesitated, and in that pause Brennan seized the moment to shield Mabel. With a swift, decisive motion, he pulled her into the safety of his embrace, his arms becoming a fortress against the harshness of the world. In the protective cocoon that Brennan provided, Mabel's body convulsed with shock and pain, her breaths coming in ragged, stuttering gasps. Every heartbeat thudded like a drum in the silence that now enveloped them, a silence filled with unspoken questions about what had just transpired and what it meant for her future. The physical bruises and the sting of tears were visible reminders of the attack, yet beneath them lay something even more profound, the ember of an inner transformation that was quietly kindled by this harrowing ordeal. For hours that stretched into what felt like an eternity, Mabel was tended to by the few who dared to show compassion in a world defined by cruelty. Brennan's gentle words, whispered like a soothing lullaby amid the storm, reassured her that she was more than the sum of her pain. "You are not weak, Mabel," he murmured, his tone both tender and fierce. "This violence, it is a wound, yes, but also a beginning. It marks the moment when you rise, when you discover the strength that you never knew you had." His words, heavy with both sorrow and hope, resonated with her. In that moment of vulnerability, a seed of transformation was planted deep within her heart. As the immediate danger subsided and the authorities took the aggressors away, the aftermath of the attack left Mabel in a limbo between despair and the tentative spark of renewal. The physical scars, though agonizing, were visible and would eventually fade, but the emotional wounds cut much deeper. Each bruise, each cut, was etched into her soul, a painful reminder of a day when the world she thought she knew shattered into a million shards. Yet paradoxically, these very fragments began to illuminate a path towards self-discovery. In the solitude of her recovery, Mabel grappled with the raw emotions that surged within her, a torrent of fear, grief, anger, and an unexpected longing for self-worth. The journey inward was as tumultuous as the external violence she had endured. Alone in a quiet hospital room, lit by the sterile glow of fluorescent lights, Mabel's thoughts turned inward. The pain was not only in her aching limbs, but also in the hollowness that threatened to swallow her spirit. She recalled the gentle, reassuring tone of Boris, the way his soft, weathered hands had once wiped away her tears in the safety of the forest. Now, in the sterile embrace of modernity, those memories seemed like distant dreams, reminders of a time when she had been whole, unburdened by the cruelty of a world that demanded conformity. Yet, amid the darkness of her despair, a subtle transformation began to take shape. The anguish she felt was raw and unfiltered, but it was also the catalyst for something deeper, a realization that her identity was not defined by the cruelty of others, but by the indomitable spirit that resided within her. The brutality of that day, as horrific as it was, became the crucible in which her true self was forged. In the quiet moments before sleep claimed her, as she lay with her wound slowly mending, Mabel began to see herself, not as a fragile, broken girl, but as a survivor, someone whose experiences, painful as they were, had the power to ignite a transformation from within. Brennan's presence remained a constant source of solace and strength during those long nights. His visits were marked by soft words of encouragement, his voice a steady beacon that cut through the thick fog of her despair. "Every scar tells a story, Mabel," he would say, his eyes reflecting both the pain of the past and the promise of a brighter future. "You are not defined by what has been done to you, but by the courage you mustered to stand again." In those moments, his words were more than mere comfort. They were a call to arms, a gentle urging for her to reclaim the power that lay dormant within her. This painful chapter of violence and suffering, though it left deep wounds, was also a turning point, a moment when the weight of her isolation began to lift, replaced by a growing recognition of her own worth. Each tear that fell, each agonizing breath she took, was a step toward understanding that the pain she endured was not a curse, but a crucible for her inner strength. It was in the quiet aftermath of the attack, as the chaos faded into sorrowful reflection, that Mabel resolved to no longer let the cruelty of the world define her. Instead, she would transform her suffering into a foundation upon which she could rebuild her life. A life imbued with the fierce promise of self-love and resilience. The corridors of her school, once the stage for heartless cruelty, now stood as a stark reminder of both the horrors of violence and the potential for rebirth. In every corner where darkness had reigned, a glimmer of hope now shone, a silent testament to the fact that even in the deepest wounds, there lay the possibility of healing. Mabel's journey had taken an irrevocable turn. The brutality she suffered was no longer a mark of her weakness, but a symbol of her survival, a catalyst for the transformation that was already beginning to unfold within her. In that transformative space where pain met possibility, Mabel began to see the outlines of a future that was uniquely hers. The oppressive weight of her past, though still heavy, now served as a counterbalance to the budding strength within her. The once overwhelming fear was gradually giving way to a determined resolve, a resolve to rise above the scars and to forge a path defined by self-empowerment and dignity. Thus, amid the lingering echoes of violence and the soft, steady pulse of hope, Mabel's heart began its slow, deliberate healing. The tragedy of that day, though seared into her memory, was also the turning point that sparked her inner metamorphosis. It was a day when the cruel world had attempted to break her spirit, only to reveal the unyielding resilience that lay dormant within. A resilience that promised to transform her pain into a powerful force for change. In the quiet, reflective aftermath, as Mabel sat alone with her thoughts and the gentle reassurance of Brennan's words, she felt the first stirrings of a new identity take root. The pain that once threatened to engulf her now became the fuel for her transformation. A reminder that from the ashes of despair, a stronger, more self-assured self could emerge. And in that poignant realization, amid the soft hum of recovery and the whisper of promises yet fulfilled, Mabel discovered that even in the darkest moments, there was a spark of light, an ember of hope that would one day grow into an unquenchable flame of inner power. In the quiet aftermath of chaos, when the pain of yesterday still lingered like a shadow at dusk, a new chapter began to unfold for Mabel. A chapter where tenderness and vulnerability intertwined with the promise of a love that could heal even the deepest wounds. It was during those long, reflective evenings that Mabel found herself drawn closer to Brennan, whose steady presence had become a beacon of light amid the storm. Their burgeoning connection was not built overnight, but rather nurtured through countless small, intimate moments that spoke of unspoken understanding and the shared pain of scars that time had yet to fade. One crisp evening, as the sky shifted from the fiery hues of sunset to the soft blues of twilight, Mabel and Brennan found refuge in a secluded corner of an old courtyard, away from the prying eyes and harsh judgments of the world. The air was cool and fragrant with the scent of blooming jasmine, a reminder that even after the harshest winters, spring would eventually arrive. In that gentle sanctuary, the chaos of her past seemed to dissolve, replaced by a calm that Brennan's mere presence invoked. Sitting side by side on a weathered stone bench, their shoulders occasionally brushed, a fleeting contact that sent quiet shivers down Mabel's spine. Brennan's voice, soft yet resolute, broke the silence. "Mabel, I know the world can be cruel, but here, with you, I want to create a space where you can be yourself, unafraid, unburdened." His words, spoken with a sincerity that resonated, in the stillness, kindled a fragile hope within her heart. Mabel's eyes glistened as she listened, the vulnerability in her gaze mingling with a newfound determination. "Sometimes," she replied in a hushed tone, "I feel as though my heart is a fortress, built high to keep the pain out. But it also traps me inside, away from the warmth I so desperately need." Her confession, raw and unpolished, hung between them like a secret waiting to be shared. A secret that Brennan, in his gentle way, was determined to help her unlock. The conversation flowed effortlessly, punctuated by moments of comfortable silence where words were unnecessary. As Brennan shared stories of his own battles, of times when he, too, had felt the sting of rejection and the weight of isolation, Mabel found solace in the realization that she was not alone in her struggles. Each tale, delivered in a voice that was both lyrical and laced with quiet strength, painted a vivid picture of a past filled with hardships, yet also imbued with resilience. It was as if Brennan's very presence was an elixir, slowly healing the fractures in her spirit with every shared memory. One particularly memorable night, as the first stars began to pierce the veil of night, Brennan invited Mabel for a walk, along a narrow lamplit path that wound its way through a serene park. The gentle hum of crickets and the distant murmur of the city created an ambiance that was at once intimate and expansive, a world where time seemed to slow, allowing each step to echo the heartbeat of the earth. Under the soft glow of the moon, their silhouettes merged into one, a delicate dance of light and shadow, hope and despair. As they strolled in silence, Brennan paused to gently brush a stray lock of hair from Mabel's face. His fingertips, warm and reassuring, lingered for a moment longer than necessary. "You are stronger than you realize, Mabel," he whispered, his voice imbued with a tender intensity that made her heart flutter. "Every scar, every hurt, they do not diminish you. They remind you of the battles you've survived and the strength you carry within." In that simple act of kindness, Mabel felt an overwhelming rush of gratitude and a stirring desire to believe that perhaps she was worthy of love. Their conversation turned to dreams and the future, an uncharted territory where hope battled against lingering fear. Brennan spoke of a world where love was not measured by conformity, but by the courage to be different. "Imagine," he said, eyes alight with a visionary gleam, "a place where our pain transforms into power, where our vulnerabilities become the very things that bind us together rather than tear us apart." His words painted vivid images of a future that was both dazzling and uncertain, a future where every moment held the possibility of redemption and renewal. Mabel, whose inner world had long been a battleground of self-doubt and guarded emotions, felt the stirrings of something new, a tender longing to let go of her fears and embrace the possibility of being loved, fully and without reservation. "I've spent so much of my life hiding behind walls I built from fear," she admitted softly, her voice trembling with both sorrow and hope. "But maybe it's time to let someone in, to allow myself to feel, to trust, and to love again." Her confession, delivered in a quiet rush of emotion, marked a turning point, a gentle surrender to the yearning that had long been locked away beneath layers of hurt. Brennan's response was both immediate and heartfelt. "I will be here with you, Every step of the way, he promised, his tone firm yet nurturing. Together, we can break down those walls. You are not defined by the pain you've endured. You are defined by the light you carry within. His side-by-side words, like a warm embrace, enveloped her and helped ease the tension that had, for so long, kept her heart in a state of constant turmoil. In the days that followed, their interactions grew richer, marked by subtle glances and whispered conversations that revealed more of their inner worlds. There were quiet afternoons spent in the library, where they huddled together over worn books of ancient lore and modern poetry, discovering shared interests and hidden dreams. Each conversation was a delicate balancing act, a tender exploration of what it meant to be vulnerable in a world that often punished softness. Yet, in their shared moments, Mabel began to see herself through Brennan's eyes, a person worthy of care, capable of great love, and resilient in the face of relentless adversity. Even as a storm raged outside one evening, the tempest mirrored. In the wild rhythm of raindrops against the windowpane, the atmosphere inside the modest apartment Brennan shared with a few trusted friends was one of rare intimacy. Huddled around a low table lit by the gentle flicker of candlelight, Mabel and Brennan found themselves drawn into a conversation that delved deep into the nature of love, loss, and the resilience of the human spirit. "Every time I've been hurt," Brennan admitted quietly, "it's left a mark on my soul. But those marks, they remind me that I've lived, that I've felt, and in feeling, I have the power to love even more fiercely." His words resonated with Mabel, stirring emotions that had lain dormant beneath her cautious exterior. Yet even in these moments of connection, a flicker of inner conflict remained, a lingering fear of vulnerability that had been etched into her since childhood. Mabel's heart was a delicate tapestry woven with threads of hope and sorrow. While the warmth of Brennan's affection beckoned her to open up, the scars of past betrayals whispered that perhaps love was too dangerous a risk. In the quiet pauses of their conversations, when words gave way to silence, she could almost hear the echoes of old wounds, a reminder that every act of trust carried the risk of pain. Despite these internal battles, Mabel began to notice subtle changes within herself. The long-held belief that she was unworthy of affection slowly started to crumble beneath the steady, caring insistence of Brennan's support. With every shared smile, every touch of his hand, and every empathetic word, she felt the icy barriers around her heart begin to thaw. "It's like I've been waiting for someone to remind me that I'm more than my past," she confessed one evening as they sat side by side on a park bench under a sky awash with the soft glow of twilight. "And you, Brennan, have become that someone who sees me, truly sees me, beyond all the pain and fear." Her words, soft yet laden with the weight of her journey, were met with a gentle smile and a reassuring squeeze of her hand. In the midst of this evolving relationship, the world around them continued to pulse with its own rhythm, a rhythm marked by both the beauty and brutality of existence. There were days when the vibrant energy of the city, the laughter of friends, and the promise of a shared future painted their interactions in strokes of hope and light. And then, there were moments when the lingering ghosts of past trauma crept in, casting long shadows over their tender exchanges. Brennan, ever the steadfast guardian, would always be quick to comfort her, his voice a soothing melody that reassured her that even in the face of darkness, there was always a light waiting to break through. Their journey together was not without its challenges. Mabel's internal struggles, her fear of being hurt, and her desperate longing to be embraced, created moments of tension that were as heartbreaking as they were transformative. There were times when she would retreat into silence, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her emotions. In those moments, Brennan's gentle persistence would draw her back, not with force, but with the unwavering certainty that she was not alone. "It's okay to be afraid," he would whisper during those fragile times. "But know that I'm here. Let me share the burden of your pain. Together, We can build something beautiful out of the fragments of your past." His words were both an invitation and a promise that love, however uncertain and fraught with risk, was a journey worth taking. Slowly, as days melted into weeks, the bond between Mabel and Brennan deepened into something profound, an intricate tapestry of shared experiences, whispered secrets, and the unspoken understanding that only those who have weathered the fiercest storms can truly comprehend. Their interactions became a sanctuary, a place where the language of love was spoken not only in words, but in the quiet, tender gestures that bridged the chasm between fear and hope. In this space of shared intimacy and raw vulnerability, Mabel began to embrace the possibility of a future unburdened by the ghosts of her past. The warmth of Brennan's presence, the steady cadence of his voice, and the gentle way he held her during moments of distress all contributed to a burgeoning belief in her own worth. It was as if, through his eyes, she could finally see the reflection of a person capable of love, a person deserving of every ounce of tenderness the world could offer. And so, as the gentle murmur of the night enveloped them in its tender embrace, Mabel allowed herself to lean into the hope that had been kindled in the depths of her wounded heart. The journey in search of love and hope was just beginning, a journey that would demand courage, trust, and the willingness to surrender to the possibility that true connection could, at last, mend the fractures of her soul. In the soft glow of dawn, as light slowly reclaimed the shadows of the night, Mabel resolved to take that leap of faith, to allow herself to be vulnerable, and to discover the transformative power of love, a power that, when nurtured with care and compassion, could turn even the most painful scars into a map of resilience and beauty. In the weeks that followed, a palpable tension began to pervade the very air of the territory, a tension born of ancient grudges, rigid hierarchies, and the simmering anger of packs whose beliefs were etched into the fabric of their souls. For Mabel, the world she once knew was now a battlefield where internal conflicts and external strife converged in a symphony of chaos and determination. As she navigated this treacherous landscape, her heart became a battleground of conflicting emotions, a relentless struggle between the yearning to be loved and the haunting fear of being hurt once again. Every day, as she walked through the corridors of her school and the narrow, graffiti-scarred alleyways where pack disputes were settled with silent stares or clenched fists, Mabel felt the weight of expectation and the pressure of legacy. The delicate balance between vulnerability and self-protection was challenged by every encounter with those who viewed her as both a symbol of hope and a potential threat. The inner conflict raged within her. Part of her longed to open up and embrace the gentle touch of love, yet another part recoiled, terrified that such intimacy would only leave her more broken. This internal turmoil reached its zenith, one fateful afternoon when the fragile piece of her world was shattered by a violent confrontation between rival packs. The Riverside pack, with their cool, calculating demeanor and ironclad discipline, had long clashed with members of other territories, who prided themselves on raw emotion and fierce independence. That day, the simmering hostilities erupted into full-blown conflict on the very grounds of the school, a setting that had once been a mere backdrop to her isolation, now transformed into an arena of strife. It began with a barrage of harsh words and accusatory glares in a deserted courtyard where groups of pack members gathered, their voices low but laced with a deadly intent. Mabel, caught in the middle of this unfolding chaos, could feel her heart pounding like a war drum. Her inner voice cried out in protest. Why must every step I take be shadowed by conflict? Why does the very air seem heavy with resentment? The cacophony of insults and the sound of fists colliding with flesh was interspersed with moments of eerie silence, where the weight of unspoken history hung over everyone like a suffocating fog. As the conflict escalated, a scuffle broke out near the entrance to the school. Mabel found herself frozen on the sidelines, her eyes wide with shock and sorrow as she watched a group of Riverside pack members, their eyes ablaze with a mix of fury and disdain, launch themselves at a rival faction from another pack. The scene, was almost cinematic in its brutality, a flurry of rapid movements, echoing shouts, and desperate struggles that seemed both surreal and heartbreakingly real. In that moment, every nerve in Mabel's body screamed in protest, the raw violence mirroring the inner battles she fought daily. "Enough!" A voice rang out, cutting through the clamor like a knife. It was one of the elder pack leaders, his tone a mixture of authority and regret, yet even his command could not fully quell the chaos that had erupted, nor the deep-seated conflicts that had long simmered beneath the surface. The leader's words were a futile attempt to restore order, but the damage had already been done. The violence on display was not just physical, it was symbolic of a society torn apart by rigid traditions and an unyielding fear of the unknown. Amid the tumult, Mabel's internal struggle became even more pronounced. Every bruise, every cry of pain from those around her, echoed the silent agony that had long haunted her own heart. In the heat of the moment, as she watched the violent clash of ideologies and raw emotion, she felt both repelled and magnetically drawn to the intensity of the scene. It was as though the carnage on the battlefield outside mirrored the turbulent storm within her. A storm where the desire to be embraced warred with the instinct to shield herself from further hurt. "Are you all just mindless beasts?" Mabel whispered under her breath, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and despair. The question, though barely audible over the din of combat, resonated deeply within her. It was a plea for understanding, a cry for a world where strength was measured not in the ability to inflict pain, but in the courage to heal and love. In that moment of introspection, the conflict before her took on a new dimension, transcending the physical and becoming an allegory for her own inner battles. Brennan, who had become her steadfast ally in the days following her own harrowing ordeal, soon appeared at her side. His face, set in a determined frown, reflected both the pain of witnessing such brutality and the unwavering commitment to protect what he held dear. "Mabel, come with me," he urged, his voice a mix of command and concern. "We need to get out of here before this turns any worse." With a heavy heart and eyes that shone with unshed tears, she allowed him to lead her away from the chaos, even as the echoes of the confrontation reverberated in her ears. As they moved through the dimly lit corridors of the building, Brennan's grip on her arm was both a literal and metaphorical lifeline, an anchor in a sea of relentless hostility. In the sanctuary of a quiet, abandoned classroom, far from the raging storm outside, Mabel finally allowed herself to breathe. The silence in that room was stark, almost deafening in its contrast to the violent outburst just moments before. Here, in the solitude of temporary safety, her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. The raw energy of the conflict had ignited a spark within her, a desire to reclaim her sense of self, to rise above the constant barrage of pain and fear that had defined her existence for so long. "You shouldn't have to live in fear," Brennan said softly, breaking the silence. His eyes, intense and searching, met hers with an unspoken promise of protection and hope. "The world is full of conflict. Yes, but there is also beauty in the struggle, if you let it transform you." His words, delivered with the calm assurance of one who had known his own share of scars, stirred something deep within Mabel. In that fragile moment, as she clutched onto his hand, the seeds of change began to take root in her heart. The intensity of the confrontation outside had not only highlighted the external divisions between the packs, but had also thrown into sharp relief the internal rift that raged within her. Each physical blow inflicted in the courtyard was a reminder of the deeper wounds that had long festered beneath her surface. A lingering fear that opening up to love and vulnerability might only lead to further heartache. And yet, as Brennan's words washed over her like a gentle tide, she realized that the only way to heal was to face those very fears head-on. In the quiet refuge of that abandoned classroom, Mabel's thoughts turned inward. She recalled the moments when she had felt utterly alone, a tiny, trembling figure in a vast world that seemed determined to overlook her existence. But now, as she sat in the dim light with Brennan by her side, she began to see that those moments of isolation had also forged a resilience within her, a quiet strength that had survived even the most brutal of storms. The memory of every harsh word, every dismissive glance, and every physical blow mingled with the comforting memories of tenderness and care. It was a complex tapestry of pain and hope, sorrow and resilience. A tapestry that, despite its frayed edges, was uniquely hers. Inside that profound silence, the world outside still roared with the sound of clashing packs. Yet inside her, a fragile clarity emerged. The conflict was not merely an external force to be feared, it was also an internal crucible, one that was slowly purifying her, forging her into someone capable of withstanding even the harshest of trials. She realized that every moment of conflict, every burst of anger and pain, was shaping her into a person who could not be easily broken, a person who, despite the scars, could one day stand tall and defy the very expectations that sought to confine her. As the minutes turned into hours and the echoes of violence began to fade into the distance, Mabel found herself on the precipice of a profound transformation. The agony of the day had left its mark, but it also illuminated a path forward, a path where the bitterness of past wounds could be transmuted into the strength to forge a new identity. Brennan's unwavering support had been the catalyst for this shift. His belief in her, even when she doubted herself, became the foundation upon which she could rebuild her sense of self. Outside, the tumult of the pack's conflict was a stark reminder of the fragile nature of order and the destructive power of unchecked emotion. Inside, however, a quiet revolution was taking place. Mabel's inner turmoil, once a source of endless pain, was now giving way to a newfound resolve. The fire that had burned within her, kindled by the violence and tempered by the compassion of those who cared, was beginning to glow steadily, a beacon of hope that promised a future where she would no longer be defined solely by the hurt she had endured. In that pivotal moment of introspection, Mabel understood that the conflicts raging around her, both external and internal, were not the end of her story, but merely the prelude to something greater. The divisions between the packs, with all their ancient grudges and bitter rivalries, were a microcosm of the struggle within her own heart. To truly transcend the pain, she would need to confront not only the hostile world outside, but also the lingering shadows that had long haunted her inner self. With Brennan's reassuring hand still clasped in hers, Mabel resolved to take the first steps toward embracing this new truth. It was a decision born not out of reckless abandon, but of a measured determination to reclaim the parts of herself that had been buried under layers of fear and sorrow. Every scar, every memory of conflict, would serve as a reminder not of her weakness, but of her capacity to rise. Stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. And so, as the night slowly gave way to the soft, uncertain light of dawn, Mabel and Brennan emerged from their refuge with a quiet determination. The harsh echoes of the earlier battle would forever remain etched in their memories, but they now carried with them a promise that the struggle, both within and without, could be transformed into a force for profound change. In the delicate balance between love and pain, fear and hope, Mabel began to forge a path that was uniquely hers, one step at a time. In the days and nights that followed, the divisions between the packs remained a constant reminder of the world's cruelty. Yet for Mabel, the internal war that had once threatened to consume her was slowly giving way to the fierce light of self-acceptance. With each passing moment, as she faced the challenges of both her turbulent environment and her own inner demons, she found a spark of strength that promised a future where love and resilience would ultimately prevail. The air was thick with anticipation as the Council of the Packs assembled in the ancient, hallowed hall, a grand chamber lined with towering stone pillars and illuminated by the flickering light of torches. The very walls seemed to breathe with the weight of centuries of tradition and the fierce pride of those who had come before. Here, among the stern faces of revered elders and the resolute gaze of pack leaders, Mabel found herself standing on the precipice of destiny. This was no ordinary gathering. It was a convergence of power, honor, and the uncompromising laws that had governed the fate of every member of the packs for generations. As the council's murmurs filled the chamber with an undercurrent of disapproval, the head of the council, a formidable figure with eyes that burned like embers, rose to speak. His voice, deep and resonant, carried throughout the hall with an authority that brooked no argument. "We have long observed the unrest in our ranks, the fracture between tradition and the evolving spirit of our people," he intoned. "Today, we must decide, will we continue to be bound by the chains of outdated customs, or shall we embrace the challenge of change?" His words, harsh yet filled with a cautious hope, hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown before the assembly. In that charged moment, Mabel felt a storm churn within her. The council's condemnation of her existence, of the very vulnerabilities that had once defined her, was laid bare before her. Every accusatory glance from the leaders, every word of judgment, echoed the bitter truth of a world where conformity reigned, and individual worth was measured solely by one's adherence to tradition. Yet, amid the clamor of condemnation, there was also a spark, a hint of possibility that perhaps the old order could be challenged, that her very struggle might ignite the change she had long yearned for. The council's decision was swift and uncompromising. Mabel would be subjected to a series of trials, both physical and mental, that would test the very limits of her resilience, her spirit, and her right to exist as her true self. The challenge was clear: to reclaim her freedom and prove that she was more than the sum of her scars and isolation. The moment had come to face the ultimate trial, a gauntlet that would force her to confront the darkness within and rise, phoenix-like, from the ashes of her former self. In the days that followed the council's decree, Mabel's world transformed into a crucible of tension and determination. The challenge was set in motion with an intensity that bordered on the cinematic. Under a sky heavy with storm clouds and the distant rumble of thunder, she was led to an open arena, a barren expanse that bore witness to centuries of conflict and sacrifice. The arena was marked by ancient runes etched into weathered stone, symbols of both hope and sorrow that resonated with the legacy of her people. The first trial was one of endurance and agility, designed to push her physical limits. Mabel found herself navigating a labyrinthine course, a series of obstacles that tested her speed, strength, and the very coordination of her body. With every leap over crumbling stone barriers, every sprint across slick, rain-drenched ground, her heart pounded like a war drum. The relentless challenge of the course was intercut with moments of pure, visceral fear, a near fall here, a stumble there, each instance a reminder that failure was not an option. In the midst of this frenetic physical trial, the pounding of her heart harmonized with the sound of driving rain, the clash of distant thunder, and the internal cadence of her resolve. But the trials were not solely physical. They demanded an exploration of the inner self, a journey into the depths of her psyche, where long-buried insecurities and the painful memories of past rejections lurked in the shadows. In one such trial, Mabel was isolated in a dark, echoing chamber, the silence pressing in on her from all sides. Here, she was forced to confront the inner demons that had haunted her for so long, the fear of vulnerability, the terror of being truly seen, and the belief that her pain defined her. In that solitude, the only sounds were her labored breaths and the echo of her own thoughts. She remembered every cruel word, every dismissive glance, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly feel the depth of her own sorrow. But in that abyss of despair, a flicker of determination emerged, a realization that her scars, far from being marks of weakness, were testaments to her resilience. It was here that Mabel began to understand that true freedom lay in the acceptance of both her darkness and her light. As the trials continued, the emotional and physical challenges intertwined in a series of breathtaking moments that felt straight out of a high-stakes cinematic epic. In one scene, amid a torrential downpour that blurred the lines between rain and tears, Mabel found herself pitted against a formidable opponent from a rival pack, a towering figure whose eyes burned with a ferocious intensity. The clash was fierce and chaotic. Fists collided with a force that sent shockwaves through the air, each strike resonating like the tolling of a bell. The sounds of grunts, the scuffle of limbs, and the overwhelming rush of adrenaline created a symphony of violence that was as mesmerizing as it was terrifying. Yet, as the battle raged, a surprising clarity settled over Mabel. With each desperate maneuver to evade her opponent's crushing blows, she began to see that her struggle was not only for survival, it was a fight for her identity, for the right to define herself on her own terms. Interwoven with the physical battles were moments of intense introspection and dialogue, where the internal conflicts of her heart were laid bare. Between furious exchanges of blows and the echo of clashing commands, Mabel's inner voice emerged in a soft, resolute tone. "I am more than my scars," she whispered to herself, each word a declaration of self-worth in the face of overwhelming adversity. It was in these quiet interludes, when the storm of conflict momentarily paused, that her spirit found the strength to rise. The challenge before her was not merely to prove her worth to the council or the packs. It was to reclaim the belief that had been eroded by years of isolation and rejection. Brennan, ever the steadfast guardian, remained a constant presence throughout the ordeal. His supportive gaze and encouraging words provided a beacon of hope amid the tumult. "Mabel, you must let the fire within you burn," he urged during a brief respite between trials, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "Every challenge you face, every scar you bear, is a step towards the freedom you deserve. Remember, the power to change lies within you." His voice, firm yet imbued with tenderness, resonated deep within her, affirming that she was not alone in this fight. The pinnacle of the trials came when Mabel was summoned to face the ultimate test, a confrontation designed by the council itself, where the stakes were nothing less than her future and the fate of the pack. In a grand open courtyard framed by ancient trees and the solemn faces of the council members, she was challenged to declare her identity and her right to a life defined by love, not by the cold edicts of tradition. The atmosphere was electric, the air thick with expectation, and the soft murmur of disapproving voices. Every eye in the assembly was fixed on her, and for a heartbeat, the weight of their judgment seemed insurmountable. Drawing a deep, steadying breath, Mabel stepped forward. In that moment, her heart thundered like a drum of war, yet her voice emerged clear and unwavering. "I stand before you, not as a broken soul, but as one who has endured and risen. My scars are my legacy. They tell the story of my survival, my growth, and the undying hope that fuels my spirit." Her declaration, bold and heartfelt, rippled through the assembly. The silence that followed was profound, a silence that spoke of contemplation, of conflict, and of the possibility of transformation. In that charged silence, the eyes of the council shifted. Some were hard and unyielding, unwilling to let go of the old ways, while others softened, moved by the raw sincerity and unbridled courage that radiated from Mabel. The clash between entrenched tradition and the call for change had reached its apex, and in the midst of it all, Mabel's voice became the rallying cry for a future that dared to embrace both the pain of the past and the promise of tomorrow. As the final challenge drew to a close, a sudden, unexpected burst of energy surged through the crowd, a palpable shift in the air that was felt by every soul present. The fierce debates, the impassioned arguments of the council, and the collective heartbeat of a pack on the brink of revolution coalesced into a singular moment of truth. Mabel, standing with the weight of her journey behind her and the hope of a new beginning ahead, had become more than just a subject of trial. She had become the embodiment of defiance against a world steeped in cruelty, a symbol of resilience that could, perhaps, pave the way for a kinder, more compassionate order. In that unforgettable moment, as the council's verdict hung in the balance and the distant thunder of change grew louder, Mabel realized that the greatest challenge was not merely the physical trials or the political machinations of the council. It was the internal battle for her own freedom, the courage to forge a path that was true to her soul. With Brennan by her side and the strength of every scar etched into her heart, she vowed to rise above the confines of a world that sought to define her by its own narrow standards. The echoes of that fateful day would forever linger, etched into the fabric of her being as a testament to the transformative power of struggle, determination, and the unyielding quest for a life defined by love and authenticity. As the sun broke over the horizon, casting golden light on a new day, Mabel stepped forward into a future that was hers to shape, a future where every trial, every hardship, would serve as a stepping stone towards the freedom and acceptance she so desperately deserved. The storm had reached its peak. The sky roiled with dark, tumultuous clouds, as if the heavens themselves were weeping for the coming conflict. In a vast clearing bordered by ancient, gnarled trees, whose twisted branches clawed at the roiling sky, the final confrontation was about to begin. Every element of nature, the howling wind, the staccato drumming of rain, the distant rumble of thunder, melded into a symphony of impending destiny, setting the stage for a battle that would forever change the lives of those involved. Mabel stood at the center of the clearing, her eyes glistening with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. The scars of her past, both seen and unseen, etched across her skin and soul, now served as a testament to her resilience. Today, the time had come for her to confront the forces that had long sought to subjugate her spirit. Across the field, the opposing forces gathered, rival pack members whose faces were contorted with raw anger and determination, their eyes alight with a hunger for power and retribution. In the midst of this chaotic convergence, voices rose in a crescendo of war, cries and desperate pleas. The battle was no longer a mere skirmish, but a full-scale clash of ideologies, loyalty, and the unyielding will to survive. Mabel's heart pounded in her chest as she surveyed the scene, a tableau of raw emotion and violence that was as breathtaking as it was brutal. The tension was palpable, a near-tangible force that vibrated through the air, urging everyone toward an irreversible destiny. Then, as if on cue, the first salvo was fired. A group of adversaries surged forward with a ferocity that sent shockwaves through the clearing. The sound of clashing bodies, the crack of knuckles, and the piercing cries of combatants filled the air, creating a chaotic, yet strangely rhythmic, counterpoint to the dark symphony of nature. Mabel's instincts kicked in, and with a deep, shuddering breath, she joined the fray. Each movement was an act of defiance, a refusal to remain a passive victim of fate. Amid the swirling melee, time seemed to distort. Moments of rapid, violent action intermingled with surreal, almost dreamlike sequences, where Mabel's inner voice broke through the cacophony of battle. "I will not be defined by the wounds of my past," she thought, each heartbeat a declaration of newfound resolve. As she dodged a heavy blow aimed at her head, her mind flashed with memories of tenderness. Boris's soft guidance, and Brennan's unwavering support, moments that lent her strength even as the violence threatened to overwhelm her. The battle raged on with relentless intensity. In one particularly harrowing moment, Mabel found herself locked in combat with a towering figure from a rival pack, a living embodiment of the ruthless traditions that had haunted her for so long. The adversary's eyes were wild with fury as his massive fists pounded toward her, and every impact sent jolts of pain through her body. Yet, with every desperate dodge and every counterstrike, Mabel felt a transformation taking place within her. The fear that had once shackled her now coalesced into a blazing determination to fight not just for herself, but for a future free from the oppressive bonds of the old order. The air was filled with a discordant blend of anguished cries and the rhythmic pounding of combat, punctuated by moments of eerie silence when the gravity of sacrifice and loss pressed down on every soul present. In the midst of the chaos, Mabel's eyes met Brennan's across the battlefield. His gaze was filled with a deep sorrow and an unspoken understanding, a silent promise that no matter what the outcome, his heart and strength would remain with her. "Hold on, Mabel," he shouted over the roar of battle, his voice raw and urgent. "Let our love be the fire that lights your path." Those words, carried by the wind and mingled with the roar of the storm, cut through the tumult like a beacon of hope. In that critical moment, as if compelled by fate, a decision loomed before Mabel, a choice that would demand the ultimate sacrifice. As the clash of steel and the shattering of bone reverberated through the clearing, a monstrous figure emerged from the shadows, a leader of the opposing faction whose presence radiated a chilling aura of merciless authority. With eyes as cold as winter's heart and a voice that dripped with disdain, he bellowed, "Surrender now or witness the downfall of all you cherish." The words ignited a frenzied surge among the enemy ranks, and the battle intensified. In the ensuing melee, Mabel was forced into a harrowing confrontation that pushed her to the brink of her endurance. She fought with every fiber of her being, her movements a graceful yet desperate dance between life and death. But as the violence escalated, it became painfully clear that victory would demand a price, a sacrifice of something precious and irreplaceable. In a breathtaking sequence that unfolded with the dramatic flourish of a cinematic masterpiece, Brennan, who had been a stalwart protector by her side, was struck down by a powerful blow from an enemy warrior. The sound of his fall, a muted thud against the wet earth, was like a knife through Mabel's heart. Time seemed to slow as she knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she cradled his battered form. The anguished cry that tore from her throat was raw and primal, a sound that mingled pain, love, and the desperate hope that somehow this sacrifice would not be in vain. As Brennan's eyes fluttered closed, a hush fell over the battlefield for a brief suspended moment. In that pause, the chaotic symphony of violence was replaced by an overwhelming, poignant silence, a silence heavy with the weight of loss and the bitter taste of regret. Mabel's heart broke anew, each beat a painful reminder of what had been lost. Yet even in that heart-wrenching instant, she felt a spark of resolve. Brennan's sacrifice was not an end, but a clarion call to rise, to transform the grief and anger into a force powerful enough to challenge the very foundations of the oppressive order. Gathering every shred of strength, Mabel rose from the ground, her eyes burning with tears and determination. The battlefield, now a swirling vortex of despair and defiance, seemed to hold its breath as she took her first steps toward the enemy lines. "For Brennan," she murmured, her voice trembling, yet resolute. "For every soul that has suffered under this tyranny, I will fight until my last breath." Her declaration rang out, clear and unyielding, across the tumultuous field, and for a moment, the clamor of battle faltered as if in reverence of her courage. In that fateful hour, the struggle reached its zenith. The collision of wills, the merging of hope and despair, was captured in every electrifying clash, every desperate scream, and every tear-streaked vow. Mabel fought with a ferocity that defied her earlier fragility, her movements imbued with a raw, almost otherworldly grace. The enemy, startled by her transformation, faltered before the unrelenting tide of her passion. Each strike, each evasion, was laced with the memory of Brennan's sacrifice, propelling her forward with the force of a tempest. As the decisive confrontation unfolded, vivid flashes of light and shadow played across the scene. The glint of a raised weapon, the reflection of a tear on a battle-scarred cheek, and the somber silhouettes of comrades falling around her. The cinematic scope of the moment was overwhelming, every detail etched with an intensity that mirrored the tumult within her soul. Amid the swirling chaos, Mabel's internal monologue became a prayer, a fervent plea for the strength to carry on, a vow that even the deepest pain could give way to the promise of rebirth. In the final moments of the clash, with the enemy's forces beginning to waver under the sheer force of her determination, Mabel found herself teetering on the edge of both physical collapse and an emotional abyss. The field, once a cacophony of battle, now pulsed with a quieter, more ominous rhythm, the steady beat of a heart that refused to yield. The opposing leader, his eyes now clouded with a mix of fury and uncertainty, advanced toward her with a final, devastating blow in his gaze. It was a moment where hope and despair intertwined, where the outcome was as uncertain as the flickering flame of a candle in the wind. In that breathless moment, as the thunder rolled overhead and the rain mingled with the tears of the fallen, Mabel raised her hand and, with a cry that resonated through every fiber of her being, launched herself toward the enemy leader. The impact was cataclysmic, a collision of wills so profound that the very ground trembled beneath them. Pain seared through her limbs, and darkness threatened to engulf her senses. Yet, even as she teetered on the brink of oblivion, her inner voice roared with an undeniable truth. This sacrifice, this act of defiant courage, would not be in vain. The ensuing seconds stretched into an eternity, each heartbeat a reminder of the cost of freedom and the fragile beauty of hope. As the dust settled and the echoes of battle began to fade, the field bore the marks of an epic struggle, a landscape forever scarred by the sacrifices made in the name of change. Mabel, battered and bruised, stood amidst the ruins of conflict, her eyes reflecting both the devastation of loss and the unyielding spark of possibility that had been ignited within her. In that final, heart-stopping moment of the clash, as the enemy leader crumbled and the remaining foes retreated in disarray, Mabel's voice, hoarse yet triumphant, carried across the battlefield. "This is not the end," she declared, her tone echoing the promise of a new dawn rising from the ashes of sacrifice. "Today, we have borne witness to the cost of oppression, and the limitless strength of a heart that dares to love, to fight, and to dream." Her words, borne on the winds of destiny and suffused with the raw emotion of countless scars, lingered long after the final echo of battle had faded. The future, uncertain and fraught with peril, now beckoned with a glimmer of hope, a hope tempered by loss, yet fueled by the indomitable spirit of those who dared to defy fate. In that defining moment, Mabel had not only fought for her own freedom, but had ignited a spark that would forever alter the destiny of her people. As the storm began to subside, and the first rays of dawn pierced the gloom, the battlefield transformed into a solemn testament to the sacrifices made in the name of change. Amid the remnants of shattered weapons and fallen warriors, Mabel stood as a beacon of defiance, a living reminder that even in the midst of overwhelming darkness, the light of hope, forged in the crucible of sacrifice, could illuminate the path to a brighter, freer tomorrow. As the sun slowly rose over a battered battlefield, its first light revealed a landscape forever altered by the violence of the preceding night. The storm had passed, leaving behind a profound silence, broken only by the gentle murmur of wind through shattered trees and the soft drip of rain from splintered leaves. The clearing, once a stage for fierce combat and bloodshed, now lay quiet, an unspoken testament to the cost of conflict, where every scar on the earth and every wounded soul whispered stories of loss and lessons hard learned. In the wake of the battle, the consequences were as stark as they were inevitable. Bodies lay strewn among broken stones and fallen weapons. The air was thick with the scent of iron and the bittersweet aroma of rain-soaked earth. Amid the debris, survivors moved slowly, their faces etched with grief and resolve. The remnants of the enemy had retreated into the distant shadows, and for a long, aching moment, time seemed to hold its breath. allowing the full measure of loss to settle into every heart. Mabel, her body bruised and her spirit heavy with sorrow, emerged from the chaos like a wounded phoenix, determined to rise from the ashes of her past. The battle had taken its toll on her physically and emotionally, but it had also sparked a profound inner transformation. Slowly, she began the painful process of healing, a journey that was as much about mending her battered body as it was about restoring the fractured pieces of her soul. In a modest infirmary set up in a quiet corner of the territory, Mabel lay. On a cot as soft, comforting blankets enveloped her fragile frame. The rhythmic ticking of a nearby clock mingled with hushed whispers and the gentle hum of healing voices. Brennan, whose steadfast presence had been a beacon of light in her darkest hours, sat at her bedside. His eyes, reflecting both the deep pain of the past and the tender hope for the future, met hers with unwavering compassion. "Take your time, Mabel," Brennan murmured softly, his voice a soothing balm against the raw edges of her grief. "Every wound, whether seen or unseen, needs time to mend. And remember, you are not alone in this journey." His words, spoken with the gentleness of a trusted friend and the authority of one who had borne his own scars, instilled in her a cautious hope. In the quiet moments that followed, as the sun climbed higher and cast a warm glow through the infirmary window, Mabel allowed herself to reflect on the day's events. Her thoughts drifted to the moments before the final clash, the raw terror, the overwhelming surge of violence, and most painfully, the sacrifice of those she held dear. Brennan's sacrifice, which had spurred her to fight with the ferocity of a desperate guardian, now served as both a burden and a guiding light. The vivid images of the battlefield, with its symphony of clashing steel and anguished cries, had slowly softened into memories that both ached and empowered her. Each scar on her skin, every bruise and cut, became a testament to the resilience of her spirit, a silent reminder that even in the face of overwhelming despair, life could find a way to bloom anew. Outside the infirmary, the world was beginning to stir. The surviving members of the packs, once divided by bitterness and ancient grudges, started to gather in small groups, offering each other solace and a tentative smile. There was a growing sense of unity among those who had witnessed the devastation. The shared experience of loss had, in its own painful way, sown the seeds for reconciliation. In hushed conversations and empathetic glances, a new kind of solidarity was emerging, a promise that the cycle of violence could one day give way to understanding and healing. In a quiet courtyard at the heart of the territory, Mabel and a few close allies gathered to share their stories and their hopes for the future. The soft murmur of voices, intermingled with the occasional laugh or tearful sigh, filled the air with an intimacy that felt both fragile and profound. It was here that the survivors began to rebuild not only their physical surroundings, but also the bonds that had been frayed by endless conflict. Old wounds were acknowledged, and while the pain was still fresh, there was also a collective determination to learn from the past and forge a new path, one defined by compassion, unity, and the courage to embrace change. Amid these moments of communal healing, Mabel took her first tentative steps toward rebuilding her own sense of self. The days of isolation and fear were slowly being replaced by an emerging belief in her own worth. With Brennan's gentle guidance, she started to participate in small gatherings, her voice growing steadier with each conversation. In the glow of a crackling fire during one late-night council, she listened intently as elders and peers alike spoke of a future where the old divisions could be mended, a future where love, understanding, and mutual respect could replace the harsh dogmas of the past. Every ending, Brennan reminded her one evening as they walked together under a starlit sky, carries within it the promise of a new beginning. We honor our losses by building something better from the fragments. His words echoed in the cool night air, mingling with the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of nocturnal creatures. For Mabel, this was not just a promise. It was a lifeline, a call to rise above the sorrow and reclaim the light that had always flickered within her. In the weeks that followed, the slow process of recovery unfolded, like the gentle unfurling of a tender blossom. Mabel's once fractured spirit began to knit itself together with threads of newfound confidence and purpose. She engaged more deeply with the community, finding strength in the shared vulnerabilities of those around her. Together, they formed a tapestry of resilience, each individual contributing their unique story to a collective narrative of hope and renewal. Small gestures of kindness, long overdue reconciliations, and the blossoming of friendships across former divides painted a picture of a future that was gradually coming into focus. The physical scars, though they would remain as silent witnesses to the violence of that fateful night, no longer defined her. Instead, they became symbols of survival, marks of a journey that had taken her through the darkest valleys and toward the bright promise of rebirth. With each new day, Mabel reclaimed a part of herself that had been lost amid the chaos, her inner light growing steadily stronger as she embraced the love and support of those who had gathered around her. The transformation was palpable. In a moment of quiet reflection by a gentle stream at the edge of the territory, Mabel gazed into the water and saw, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a clear reflection of her true self. There was still pain in her eyes, a lingering sorrow for what had been lost, but there was also a spark of fierce determination, a promise that she would not be defined by the tragedies of the past. Instead, she was becoming the architect of her own destiny, ready to shape a future that honored the sacrifices made and the lessons learned. In that luminous moment, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows over the water's surface, Mabel silently vowed to herself and to the world she would rebuild not only her own life, but also the bonds that held the packs together. The promise of unity and reconciliation, born from shared loss and hard-won wisdom, would light the way forward. Every tender smile exchanged, every heartfelt conversation in the quiet corners of community gatherings, was a step toward a more compassionate and united future. As the season of healing continued, the survivors began to see the first hints of true transformation. Long-held divisions softened by mutual grief gave way to earnest dialogues, and the rigid hierarchies that had once defined the packs began to crumble under the weight of collective resolve. The landscape of power was shifting, slowly, surely, toward a system where empathy and cooperation would guide decisions, replacing the old ways of unyielding dominance with a vision of shared strength. For Mabel, the journey of recovery was far from over, but each day brought with it a renewed sense of possibility. Her scars were a map of where she had been, a testament to the battles fought and the price of freedom, but they were also the foundation upon which she would build a future defined by resilience, love, and the unwavering belief that every life could be redeemed. And so, in the quiet aftermath of devastation, amid the gentle murmur of healing voices and the soft glow of a new dawn, Mabel stepped forward into a future that was gradually taking shape. A future where every loss was transformed into the promise of rebirth, and every fragment of a shattered past became a stepping stone toward a life rich with hope, unity, and enduring love. In the soft glow of a new dawn, the world seemed reborn from the ashes of yesterday's storms. Mabel stood at the edge of a vast, open expanse, a place where the scars of conflict had slowly given way to the tender hues of hope. The gentle, afterglow of sunrise cast golden rays across a landscape that bore the marks of hardship, yet now shimmered with the promise of renewal. It was here, in this transcendent moment, that she reflected on the long, winding journey that had brought her from a fragile, isolated child to a resilient soul, capable of igniting change with the strength of her inner light. As Mabel surveyed the horizon, her thoughts traveled back to the earliest memories of her life, a time when she wandered alone among the ancient trees of the forest, clinging to the soft, whispered lessons of Boras. She recalled the tender days of innocence, when every rustling leaf and every gentle breeze spoke of a world filled with magic and quiet wonder. Yet, Even then, the seeds of her pain were sown by a society that demanded conformity and silenced the tender voice within her. Over time, those early experiences had been tempered by trials and sacrifices, a series of battles both on the physical plane and within her own heart. Her journey had been marked by moments of unyielding loneliness and piercing grief, each heartbreak, a crucible in which her inner strength was forged. The tumult of her school days, filled with isolation and the sting of rejection, had taught her that the world often sought to diminish those who dared to feel deeply. But even amid that harsh reality, she discovered that her vulnerability was not a curse, but a testament to the profound capacity for love that resided within her. Every tear shed, every scar earned on the battlefield of life was proof of her survival and of the boundless potential for transformation. There were days when the pain had threatened to break her entirely, when the weight of ancient prejudices and relentless conflicts pressed down upon her like an unforgiving shroud. In those moments, she had felt small and insignificant, as if the world would never see her true worth. But with time, guided by the steadfast support of friends like Brennan and the whispered wisdom of those who had walked a similar path, Mabel began to realize that no one is ever truly worthless. Instead, every wound, every sacrifice, was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the spark of hope could kindle an unyielding flame. Now, standing before the vast expanse and bathed in the luminous afterglow of a storm-cleansed sky, Mabel felt a serene clarity settle within her. The landscape before her, winding rivers that glistened like silver threads through emerald fields, and distant mountains that stood as silent witnesses to centuries of endurance, became a metaphor for her own life. The journey had not been easy. It had been a long, turbulent road strewn with obstacles and the echoes of past sorrows. Yet, as the first light of a promising future touched the land, it also touched her heart, affirming that every hardship had prepared her for this moment of rebirth. Her inner voice, once marred by self-doubt and fear, now sang with quiet assurance. "I am not defined by my past," she thought, each word a defiant declaration against the voices that had long sought to silence her. "I am defined by the strength I have discovered within, by the love I have given and received, and by the courage to continue despite the odds." The truth of that belief resonated deeply, a powerful reminder that love, sacrifice, and inner resilience had the power to transform fate itself. As she continued to gaze upon the horizon, Mabel recalled the moments of unity that had begun to mend the fractured bonds of her world. In the aftermath of conflict, the survivors had come together, recognizing that the true enemy was not the individual, but the outdated customs that had bred division and pain. From quiet gatherings under starlit skies to heartfelt conversations in humble rooms, a new vision was slowly emerging, a vision where every life was cherished, and where the strength of community would nurture a future built on compassion and understanding. In those intimate moments of shared grief and joy, the message became clear. No one is worthless. Every soul, no matter how scarred, carries the capacity to heal and to illuminate the darkness with its own unique light. It was this truth that had guided Mabel through the most turbulent periods of her life, and it was this truth that now shone brightly, promising that the struggles of yesterday could be the foundation for a more vibrant tomorrow. With the fresh light of dawn dissolving the remnants of night, Mabel felt the call of the future, a gentle but insistent whisper that urged her to take the next step. Although the wounds of the past would always be a part of her, they no longer had to define her. Instead, they could be transformed into stepping stones, each one a lesson learned and a testament to the unbreakable spirit that had carried her through unimaginable trials. As the wind picked up, carrying with it the soft scent of rain and the promise of growth, Mabel took a step forward. In that moment, she imagined a world where love and sacrifice were not burdens to bear, but the very essence of life. A world where every individual, regardless of the pain they had endured, could rise to meet their destiny with unwavering resolve. It was a future filled with possibility, where the enduring bonds of community and the transformative power of self-acceptance would guide every step. Before her, the vast landscape stretched out like a canvas, awaiting the brushstrokes of a new era. The remnants of the old order lay scattered like the broken pieces of a shattered mirror. Yet from those fragments, a new picture was beginning to emerge, a picture of unity, of a world where every heart could beat freely, unburdened by the weight of outdated traditions. Mabel's own journey was just one thread in this grand tapestry, yet its brilliance had the power to inspire change far beyond her own life. In the soft, tender light of the morning, she turned her gaze back toward the path behind her, a path lined with memories of hardship and sacrifice, yet also with the shimmering promise of love rediscovered. It was a path that had been marked by the bittersweet interplay of loss and hope, where every step taken had led her to the realization that true strength lies in embracing both the pain and the beauty of life. Mabel's final words, spoken softly, to the wind as if in conversation with the universe, carried a message for anyone who had ever felt unworthy. You are not alone. Every tear, every scar, is a testament to the courage within you. Love is the force that binds us, and it is through our shared struggles that we find the power to create a future filled with hope. As the day unfolded and the light grew stronger, the open horizon beckoned with endless possibilities, a future still waiting to be written, where every broken piece could be mended and every soul could find its rightful place in the mosaic of life. The journey was far from over. In fact, it was only beginning. The promise of tomorrow shimmered in the distance, a promise of reconciliation, renewal, and the transformative power of self-love. The story of Mabel, marked by the trials of this past and the triumph of the human spirit, was an ode to resilience, a vivid reminder that even the deepest wounds can eventually give way to healing, and that every soul, no matter how scarred, is a beacon of inherent worth. In the final moments of that radiant morning, as the echoes of her journey mingled with the gentle rustle of the new day, Mabel stepped confidently forward, her heart alight with the knowledge that the power to change her destiny, and the destiny of those around her, lay within her own hands. And so, with the open horizon before her and the quiet assurance of a future yet to be unveiled, Mabel embraced the endless possibilities of a new beginning, an invitation to all who had ever felt lost that the journey of healing and transformation continues, one courageous step at a time.